Howdy, BHRCers. You can find every episode of Why People on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever else you get your podcast content. On this episode, episode number 35 of Why People, we'll talk to Josh Varone. Josh is the Executive Vice President and Chief Human Resource Officer at Centreville Bank. He has a really cool background and looking forward to get into it, so stay tuned. All right, Josh, welcome to Why People podcast. Excited to have you on. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Sean. Excited to be here.
Yeah, and we're excited too, Josh, and thanks for letting us know that you've seen or heard a few Why People episodes. You know, we kind of follow the same conversational cadence. We like to. Our objective really is to give our audience and our viewership just a look into kind of your journey, and it's been amazing. This is episode number 35. It's been amazing to see just how different everyone's journey is, but that there's a lot of kind of key themes that seem to kind of pop up and be common through a lot of the leaders we chat with. So if you wouldn't mind, Josh, getting us started, would love to hear how the Josh Varone story starts. Some people go all the way back to the cradle. You pick where we start, but looking forward to getting into it.
Well, thank you. I don't think I'm going to go all the way back to the cradle, but we'll go back a long time. My journey, I look back now and it was a different one. It wasn't a traditional journey within an HR framework. I was a history major and ended up going and getting my master's degree in American history. So we can talk history, presidents, anything like that all day long, but that has nothing to do with what I do every day. So what was interesting and defined my journey a little bit were two things. And the first was, a tragic day in American history was 9/11. Which really, it changed the trajectory of what I was going to do with my career. Prior to 9/11, I actually did an internship down at the National Archives in Washington, D.C., and went on to then go to grad school in American history. And I was really targeting a role in archival work. And whether it was at the National Archives or anywhere else, that's what I wanted to do. There was some research there. There was the passion I had for history. But 9/11 changed that tremendously from the standpoint of, if everyone remembers back then, there was a lot of government funding going to the military. And in response to that, a lot of the positions that I was interested in talking to people about while I was in grad school were grant funded, and they just weren't working out. A lot of them were pulling back. So what I started to do is I worked in retail. I had the same retail job at a company called West Marine all through college. I worked there as a sales manager, sales associate. I was even a store manager while I was in grad school. So when some of the jobs weren't working out that I thought I wanted to do with my career, I said, you know what, I'll just keep working at West Marine until I find my real job someday. And lo and behold, here we are 23, 24 years later, and I guess I'm still looking for my real job, but not really, because what happened at West Marine is I continued to be a store manager, and then one day I was approached that, hey, we have a training manager opening, and we think you'd be great for it. Your new hires in your store are always the best trained, best results, all of that. Have you given any thought to doing that? I said, no, I haven't, but I'll try it. So I became a training manager at West Marine, and it was not only on onboarding, it was soft skills. It kind of morphed into a lot of things, and that was really my introduction to HR. So I'd like to say I kind of fell into HR, and it was a few years later after I was continuously doing it that I realized, okay, this is my career path now. And for me, I go back all these years later, and what excites me today excited me then, and I called it the light bulb moment. The point where you see a connection with an employee, whether it's training, whether it's career pathing, and you realize that they're having success in doing something they didn't think they could because of your efforts and influence on them. So that's how I got into HR. And that was a long time ago. Along the way, I took on various roles within HR. I moved into the restaurant industry very briefly as a training manager. And then from there, got into more of a global company working for Swarovski Crystal. And that's really where I I got my full exposure to all things HR, worked as a trainer, a recruiter, employee relations specialist, got into a little bit of benefits and compensation, both from a North American standpoint, but also a global standpoint. And, an interesting thing that happened then, or another defining moment, was back in 2008, 2009. If anyone remembers some of the financial crisis we had then, it impacted Swarovski, not me personally, but it impacted HR. And we lost some staff in HR. And as a result, the head of HR came to me and said, "Hey, Josh, can you try doing this now?" And I said, "Sure, why not?" So that's really how I branched out into more recruitment, employee relations, things like that. Fast forward a few years, I get a call from AAA Northeast. Um, and it was from the head of HR there, who was actually the head of HR at Swarovski that hired me there 5 years earlier. He had since moved on to AAA, but he called me because they were growing and expanding, and they were looking for a new position to help oversee basically a recruitment and employee relations function at AAA. So once again, took the call, had a few interviews, got the offer, and I said, "Sure, why not?" And that was one of the best decisions I made, because it also allowed me to keep working with someone who became a strong mentor to me, who I met years earlier at Swarovski. But it also gave me a higher level strategic involvement in all HR things, where I got to be a part of the entire function once again. And from there, I moved on from AAA into the medical field as the CHRO for Rhode Island Medical Imaging. And unfortunately, that move was about 3 months before we had this little thing called COVID start. So what they hired me for, what I thought I would be doing there, changed forever. And it became about 2.5 years of what everyone remembers HR doing during COVID. So that led to the position I'm in now at Centreville Bank, where I've been here almost 3 years now. And Centreville Bank is a great company. What I really enjoy most as I look back at my career journey is the things I'm doing now. I see and I'm reminded of, these were the things I've done at all those stops along the way. And I can remember people, specific events, and things like that where I learned how to do some of these things, but now I'm just applying it naturally and also teaching it to others that work for me, in this scenario. So I'm a firm believer everything happens for a reason. I think there's a lot that I learned in my career journey, but also I think there's a lot that others can take from it too. And I try to do that as much as I can.
Yeah, Josh, this is really cool for me personally, because I remember meeting you for the first time. It was right at the beginning of COVID, and it was right around the time that you had just taken your first CHRO role,
Right.
and we had talked kind of about that thought process and
Yeah.
how excited you were. So it's neat to hear it, or at least understand it from a full spectrum standpoint. And I'll ask you a few questions uh,
Sure.
about the journey, but I have to rewind all the way to how much. So I mean, you can say whatever you want. You've had an amazing career, and I'm excited to chat about it. But you can't tell me you're not always going to be a quote unquote history guy. And so my question is, how much history is a part of your function now? There's all sayings out there about history, and if you don't
Mhm.
remember it, it's bound to repeat itself. Like, do you take a historical approach to any of your leadership, or any of the part of your function?
Yeah, not from a factual standpoint of what happened, but there's a lot of things that I learned philosophically about history that I do use with teammates and others. And one of those is, you just said it. History happened. If you're not mindful, you're doomed to repeat it. I take it from the standpoint of learning and development. Like, we can't change what just happened. All we can do is focus and learn from it for the next thing. So we talk a lot about that. The one thing I do enjoy doing, like, if there are still classes that I'll facilitate from a training standpoint, because that's another one of my passions from early on, is I like quotes. I like presidential quotes. I like historical references. So I'll do that when I can. And one of the things that I like to tell people about from a career development standpoint, especially in this day and age, is, people they want to get to the top so quickly. And when they don't get there as quickly as they think, they take it as a negative and it can really spiral them backwards. I like to talk to people about Abraham Lincoln from the standpoint of, basically the first successful thing he ever did in his life was become president. He literally failed at everything. Tried to get into Congress, failed. Senate, failed. He was a failed lawyer. People would even say he failed in his personal life, but he didn't quit. It was all about perseverance. And I like to tell people that when I'm talking about their career development, because sometimes there are things that are not in your control. It's about, are you prepared at the right time? And what I tell people is you can't change timing. Sometimes you just need more time in the job or time in the role. But what you can control is when that time is right, will you be as prepared as possible? So those are some of the learnings I've had from my background in history that I try to apply in my current role.
Yeah, that's really neat. Yeah, I love the Lincoln story and think about him often when I'm failing along the way, and think to myself, "Oh, my Sean Lavin, Abraham Lincoln quote card just getting more comparable." But well, that's really neat, Josh. And so the first question I have about the career kind of timeline you shared for us is, I think you might have the most dynamic and diverse background from an industry standpoint that I've seen. Really not a ton of commonality between stops, and we can get into the philosophical debate of people are people, right? That so there's that commonality, but just generally speaking, having done, I don't know, close to 40 of these now, a lot of folks have some industry specific commonality, or sometimes it's two, right? Life sciences and tech, sometimes, the velocity in which those businesses move and so on and so forth. And I don't want to assume here, so I'm going to ask the question. But I was fascinated at your entrance into human resources was through training, was through learning and development, was through career pathing, which a lot of folks have always known has been, one of the most important, if not the most important part of an employee value proposition. I think we found out more about it in the quote unquote no, I always call it resignation. Yeah, great.
The Great Recession. We weren't here for that.
Right, the Great Resignation, right, when salaries and comp went all over the place, and the market was kinda funky from a compensation standpoint, we found out pretty quickly that on the way in, that can be somewhat important, but once an employee is somewhere, what they really value, and you said it, is understanding how they can get somewhere they wanna go relative to an organization. And so, I think it's really neat that that's how your foray started. Uh, help me connect the dots between your different stops. Is there a common thread that you were brought in to, enhance this part of the business? Is that kinda what you got known for, or was every stop really uniquely circumstantial?
Uh, yes and no. It's a difficult one to answer. I can tell you, so my first role from the training standpoint, that was retail. And I remember interviewing at Swarovski, and one of the things they liked was my retail industry background. Because let's face it, doing HR, doing training in a multi-site, cross the country format is one of the most challenging things to do because you have different state laws and one size does not fit all. So at Swarovski, they were specifically looking for somebody who had that multi-site retail type um, background. So it helped me there. I don't think it ever helped me again. So um, when I went to AAA, obviously it was the person that hired me at Swarovski, so they knew I had some credibility. They knew what I was about. But one of the things about AAA that people often forget about is there's literally like 15 different industries in that one company. So it's a matrix environment, a matrix org structure, and you have financial services, you have insurance, you have travel, you have customer service, you have retail. That's probably only half of it. So you really spread out. And, what really helped me along the way is I don't want to say that people are widgets, but you said it, people are people. And I can tell you when I moved on to Rhode Island Medical Imaging, um, yes, there were medical positions, yes, they were doctors, but at the end of the day, their instincts and their behaviors were no different than senior level executives at other companies or customer service employees at other companies. The issues you run into are the same, and the way you attack them is the same. And then lastly, when I came here to Centreville Bank, one of the things that they were attracted to me about was that I wasn't from banking, because they wanted new ideas and different ways of doing things. So, I've always taken the approach in my roles, but also in interviews when I talk about this, about my passion and what I'm most focused on. And it's about treating people the right way. It's about being a genuine person. I often tell people, you know, I believe in doing the right thing for the right reason, and everything else takes care of itself. And that's what I've always tried to do along the way. And obviously it worked because, the whole Swarovski to AAA jump, I think speaks to, someone who liked the way I was doing it and wanted to give me an opportunity to do it at a larger level. And then from there, I've been able to kind of relay those experiences and my style into other industries.
Yeah.
And I got to tell you a quick funny story. I was at a banking conference last week, and I was talking to someone, and she said, oh, I remember when they were hiring you, and I couldn't believe they were hiring someone to head up HR who wasn't from banking. And we kind of laughed. I said, I know, I can't believe that banking has people too, just like every other industry. And so it's one of those things. I think years ago it might have been more important, but today it's what I said. It's doing the right thing for the right reasons. Doesn't matter if that's in life sciences and banking and retail. People respond to change, they respond to recognition, and they respond to engagement all the same way.
Yeah. Yeah, it I really enjoyed the way you explained that, Josh, because it's neat. Using my own personal kind of experience, I grew up in a small family construction family doing concrete foundations. The company was about 20 people, and I had the good fortune and the poor fortune of, being on the job sites doing the work, but also the last name that was on the side of the trucks, and so, uh, I really enjoyed kind of what I learned and the camaraderie, but at the end of the day, when people weren't having a great day or didn't like their direction, it was my family that was getting kinda chastised a little bit, right? But
Sure.
I often tell folks what people were after on those job sites, even though they didn't articulate it in nomenclature that we see all over the place now, it was all the same things in corporate America and across different industries. It was right. It was compensation, benefits, work-life balance, recognition, leadership. Right. People that believe
Yeah.
in you. It didn't change, and it hasn't changed. So I think it was really cool the way that you mapped that out.
Yeah, and you know what, Sean? It's more important now than ever. I mean, the salaries and benefits, that's the price of admission now. If you're not competitive there, nobody cares about anything else. Um, so that's kind of a given. They really are focused on synergy between themselves and the company's values, feeling like they're more than a number, feeling like there's good communication, engagement, stuff like that. And for me, it's not that that's easy, but that's always been part of how I see HR. It's taking care of people and it's being genuine. And I'll give you another historical reference, and this will be the last one, I think. But I've actually used this one in some trainings here, and it's a Teddy Roosevelt quote that I've talked with prospective HR people in interviews before, and it's about how nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. I can sit here for an hour and talk to you about all the success and all the great things that I've done in HR, but nobody cares about that. What they care about is that when they were having a personal situation or a challenge with their supervisor, and maybe I was able to help them get over that and continue to be a productive employee, that's what matters to them. And that's what opens it up for them to see a broader perspective of the HR expertise in this world.
Yeah, I love the Teddy Roosevelt quote. And not to go on a side track, but you came into HR through training and learning and development. I have a total different life and career as a educator and a coach, and that Teddy Roosevelt, I mean, talk about
Oh,
a classroom or a locker room that you're trying to. I mean, no one cares what you got to say until they know that you're there for them. You know.
yeah, exactly.
Um, well, that's neat, Josh. I just want to make a quick pivot here, and really it gets into the kind of the midpoint of our conversation where we start to talk about how you thought about some of these different moves personally. And what I recall when we first met, I was really impressed by you have a really high level of self awareness, and what I recall from us chatting is you had a really specific kind of next step of what you wanted to do in your career, and maybe that's from years and years of career pathing other folks, but you had a very, very kind of clear vision of here's what I've done, here's what I'm at, here's what I want to do, and here's what I think has to be next. Um, for a lot of the folks that listen to this podcast, they're in a position within their organizations, whether it's HR or otherwise, where they're still kind of thinking about what they want to do next. And I guess if you wouldn't mind sharing with us, could you tell us a little bit about those steps and what you were thinking about relative to what you wanted to accomplish?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really at AAA when I started. I think I said earlier, having more strategic involvement in HR, more involvement with business lines from an HR standpoint, and that's really where I started to get serious about my next role. And I've done all things HR. What I haven't done yet is tie them all together from the standpoint of running the function. It's much different being, the second in command, if you will, of HR that's operationally focused on making sure everything's working versus taking the jump to being a balance of operational and strategic and tying a strategic plan from an HR standpoint into the business initiatives. So that's what I set out to do. And my the head of HR at the time at AAA was very supportive in giving me career opportunities, job shadows and other functions within HR and even within the business itself to give me more experience in doing it. But also, one of the most difficult things for me to come to grips with is I started to learn that for me to really get to the next role and next level, which I want to do in my career, it meant I would have to leave AAA. It just wasn't, and this is the toughest thing for people. You have to look at what's your career goal? Is it to get to a certain role or level, or is it to continue to stay where you are and grow as much as you can? And it's difficult. And what I would tell people is you have to become comfortable being uncomfortable with this rationale and this thought process. Because I remember the day I made the decision, long discussions with my wife, but making the decision that I think it's time I have an opportunity here. It's time I say goodbye to AAA, and go do this on my own. And while that was a little scary, the thing that I kept coming back to that was in the back of my mind saying, no, don't do it, was the people, the relationships that you develop over 8 years in an organization where you've been through difficult times with people, both personal and professional. You've helped people develop, you've hired people and watched them grow. And that's really the tug at the heartstring that says, do you really want to give this up? And I'll tell you, it was extremely difficult. But in the end, I had to just keep reminding myself, yeah, this is going to hurt. Yes, I'm going to be uncomfortable. But if I want to get to where I'm going, I need to do something different. I need to step outside that comfort zone. So that's what led me to make the jump to Rhode Island Medical Imaging. And what I would tell people that are maybe in a similar situation or grappling with the same thing is, don't worry, you'll be fine. It's normal to feel that way. But the other thing too is once you leave, those people that you were close to, they don't disappear. They don't just go away. What it is, it's a next level of you enlarging your network. So I still talk with people from AAA regularly. In fact, I just saw someone that I haven't worked with since 2010 at Swarovski. I saw him at a high school basketball game last week, and we caught up for 20 minutes. It was like we were working together last week. So if you're that genuine person that I've talked about before, and if you do things the right way from a relationship standpoint within HR, those relationships they'll never disappear. Yes, they'll evolve, but I kind of look at it, it's a balance. If you need to continue to grow, if that's your goal, to those opportunities when they arise, but never forget where you came from and those that helped you along the way.
Yeah, that's neat, Josh. It's cool to hear you say that, and yeah, it's neat when you're able to see folks from different parts of your journey, and have that sincere relationship. I think it speaks to what you got to, that
Right.
it's a growth, it's a momentum. It's not a vacuum in each stop. It's a
Yes.
journey for everyone.
Well, that's just it. The careers are evolution. They're not just this ends, this starts, this ends, this start. It's not. It's your progression and it's your evolution and it's different for everyone.
Well, a question, Josh, as you've shared your journey and specifically as you've got into the executive leadership roles, I didn't realize when we had first met, I don't think we went all the way back as far as we were going in this conversation. So I didn't realize how you started at Western Marine, right? And the fact that you started there and ended up running a store, like you are the business. And so I'd imagine that makes it easier to transition to a role where you're helping support the business. And
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so my question is, one of the common themes that we've heard from almost all your peers on this podcast, now episode 35, is if you really want to be strategic, and some folks are totally fine with their career in whatever role they're in, and they say, I don't want to be as strategic as that role.
Mm.
But if you do want to get into the executive leadership spot, that understanding the business in totality and where the people make the most impact and how to be able to talk about your objectives and your challenges and what you're working on through the lens of the full business and not
Right.
so much in your function is super important. And so my question, long-winded enough, right, is at Western Marine, you knew the business because you were the business. At each one of these stops, and they're all, some similar, but, retail, med device, banking, like, they're they're different. How'd you learn the business fast enough to be effective at what you were charged with leading?
Yeah, I think that's the same everywhere. It's get out and talk to the people. So one of the things, and I still do this now, even with my HR folks here at Centreville Bank, is they all have travel schedules where they're out in the branches. When they're here at headquarters, they're walking the building. And that's something that, I've always been big on, manage by walking around. And this is from my AAA days when you had 900, 1,000 people in a building. And I would walk through the call center, and I would know if something was off just by what I was observing because it wasn't the norm that I observed. And you have to have that muscle memory of, yeah, this is just part of my job of walking the floor or checking in with certain people or visiting some branches. So for me, that's part of the onboarding. When I joined Rhode Island Medical Imaging, I spent the first 30 days in the sites, sitting next to the techs, talking to them, understanding what their challenges were, but also what their jobs were. It's the same thing here at Centreville Bank, where you got to go out and observe the bankers with the customers. That's where it all starts. It's no different from an HR expert standpoint of when you write a job description, right? How am I going to write a marketing specialist job description? I'm not a marketing specialist. You go and you sit with the person. You observe them doing some of their role. You ask them questions. You look at it from a different lens. So for me, that's what it's always been about is, employees, they can't feel supported if you seem too far and distant from what they're doing. So you always have to kind of buddy up next to them, let them see you as a normal person, because that's what we are at the end of the day. And it gives you more insight and it helps you be more strategic because, thinking about decisions and how it impacts the end user just becomes second nature.
I think that's so cool, and I'm not gonna tell the historian, but I think management by walking around, I think that's another President Lincoln thing, or at least I know he did it. I don't know if he
You did it, yeah. I don't think it was coined, but yeah.
Well, Josh, this is great, and we'll kind of turn now to the tail end of our conversation that we always kind of look towards the future in the last 10 minutes here. How are you specifically thinking about the future relative to HR and people in the work? What's got your attention these days?
So the way I'm thinking about it, not just here at Centreville Bank, but also just, through local associations within HR is back to basics. I think the basics of HR have not been the focal point for a long time. And when I talk about the basics, it's hiring the right person, retaining the right person, having good engagement efforts, strong communication, the things that really influence a company culture. So from my standpoint, the culture piece is the most important thing going forward and how that's supported from an HR standpoint, because a culture can be good, it can be bad, it can be toxic. And a lot of times you'll hear people say, well, HR doesn't have a lot to do with that. It starts at the top. And I don't necessarily agree with that. What starts at the top is a partnership between, say, a president and HR. And HR will be as successful as that partnership. So for an HR executive, the future is about making sure they have that seat at the table. They have the ear of the president. They're in sync with what they're looking for, and they're educating them on why a strong culture is important. Why is it important to have good engagement activities? Why is it important to communicate proactively and effectively? If that person knows that, then HR, the job of HR really goes back to the fundamentals of let's just execute this, come up with a proactive plan, engage our employees, and really operate at a higher cultural level than we have in the past.
Well, it's neat to hear you put it that way, Josh. It just brought a flashback. One of our previous podcast guests, Joe San Gregorio, he's the chief human resources officer at Curia, a big life sciences company. Um, and he's funny because he talks about how long he's been doing it. I think he's been a CHRO for almost 30 years and been in the HR function for over 40. I might get a text about that with for sharing it again, but he says that the CHRO role is the only role that truly is between the C-suite and in the workforce, and it almost operates in this chief of staff format. And to kind of expand on you chatting about the role in culture, it's if you think about Joe's, kind of diagram, if you will, it's hard to say that, that connection between the executive team and the workforce isn't a big part of culture, because that's the connection point.
It's a huge part, and I think that's where companies struggle today. I think if you really do a deep dive, you'll see that's the challenge, is maybe not a strong enough relationship between the head of HR and the president or uh, the COO, whoever it might be in that organization, because that's it all starts and ends right there. You can propose all the great HR programs in the world, but if you don't have buy-in at the top to support them, they're going to fall flat.
And it's neat, Josh, just hearing you speak of some of these things. I had a previous career way back when I was in education. I was a teacher and a principal and all that fun stuff. But one of the best bosses I ever worked for was a school superintendent. Um, and and I think back to this all the time because it was a while ago. I didn't grow up in HR. I barely knew what HR meant way back then. But my boss used to say that she was a CHRO, and I asked, "What does that mean?" And she said, "Well, I'm the chief hurdle remover officer." And I thought it was a neat way to put it. She really boiled down to her job as not only leading the school district, but getting things out of the way for people to be amazing, and some of what
Yeah.
you're sharing here kinda lines up with that, you know?
Well, that's exactly it, and that's the evolution of the HR role, where we're not the personnel department anymore. We're not doing name changes, address changes, stuff like that. It's really being that lifeblood of the company culture and moving whatever walls you need to move to make sure that's maintained at the appropriate level based on that partnership between the CHRO and the president. And it's when you have that, it's a feeling of empowerment, and it's a feeling that, we can do anything. That's something we've been very successful here at Centreville Bank over the last year and a half is, when they brought me in, there was a specific ask to we wanna be known as an employer of choice. I mean, who doesn't wanna hear that as a head of HR? Basically, we're gonna try everything. And I think the willingness from the leadership here at Centreville Bank is what enabled HR to be so successful and really take us to a new level.
Employer of choice, yeah, that's a good starting spot for a HR leader to start to think about. Well, Josh, the last question here, and I'm really interested to hear um, your answer here, just because of your background. So uh, we've been lucky that a lot of folks have picked up and started following. I don't know the cool words that you use, subscribe or like or follow, whatever. But we have a lot of folks that have added why people to their podcast mix, and we've got a decent amount of fan mail. And a question that comes up a lot is, we have a lot of listeners that are in the middle of their HR career journey, and, eh, they don't it's not always the word stuck, but they don't necessarily know if they wanna get to the next level, or they think they do, but not sure how, and I guess, someone, number 1, that did so much work in training and career pathing, but also had such a unique and focused career path yourself. What advice would you give to someone in that kind of middle stage that's thinking about what's next and how to get there?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. The first piece of advice would be to get out of their own head for a minute. A lot of times when people are stuck like that, it's because they're envisioning themselves in their current role with their current company. And what that does is it limits your forward thinking. So similar to what I said, where, I realized at one point that I would have to leave AAA to achieve my career goal. It's the same thing. Take your company out of it, take your current job out of it, and think about, why did I get into HR, and what am I most passionate about? What makes me happy that I'm doing at work? And if you can get an answer to any one of those, really, I think it's going to open your mind, and you're going to start to think about, am I maximizing my answers in my current role, or can I take it to the next level? And that's where I think that helps people understand, do I have more room to go? Or am I happy where I am? And once you get there, the other piece of advice I give people is never say no to an opportunity. I mean, that's one of the things that happened to me. I was a store manager. They asked me to get into training. Sure. I was a trainer. They asked me to get into recruiting and in ER. I said, sure, I'll do it. Do you want to come to AAA? Sure. I've never said no to an opportunity. And it could be good and bad, I guess. But from a career standpoint, it's about, there's horizontal growth as much as there's vertical growth in your career. And the more people can do to grow and widen their scope and their perspective on things, it just opens up more vertical ladders for them to climb throughout their career. And if you never want to climb a ladder, that's okay, as long as you're fulfilled and you're getting everything out of your career that you want. So those would be the two things I would give people advice on.
Yeah, I love that, Josh, and yeah, and I certainly hear what you're saying. Never saying no to an opportunity. We can go down the rabbit hole of what I'm. No. But generally speaking, right? I have a friend, Scott Landers. He's the CEO of Achievers. Really great guy. And his big thing is, he says, "You're in the room for a reason. You're being asked for a reason. A lot of times people see the potential in you before you see it in yourself." That's kinda like human nature, you know what I mean? Because to your point, you're in your own head so much that you can't see the forest among the trees, but someone else can. And so relative to opportunity, yeah, not saying no right away and at least kinda going through a framework of, "Wow, what could this look like and how would I do in it?" That's neat.
Yeah, and I guess I would just add to that, Sean. For me, it was more about, um, these were questions that were outside of what I thought my career path would be. When I was a trainer, I thought I would be a head of training someday, and I would run a training department. But then those other questions led me to kind of broaden that scope and say, well, okay, well, I can do more than that. Or, hey, this is fulfilling. I can keep doing that. So it's, just because you think you know what your career path is today doesn't mean that's what it actually will be someday.
Sure. Well, Josh, last question here, and it's kind of a follow-up to what we just chatted about. What if you're an HR or people, professional, you're in a role and you know that you already know, I want that next position, I want that next opportunity. It's not moving as fast as it feels like it should, and you already touched on this kinda earlier, but, like, any advice or any, kind of, mindsets for that person that's eager to get to what's next?
Yeah, a few things. From an eager standpoint, continue to check yourself. Don't get so far over your skis that you fall on your face. So, you know, I look at it as the confident versus cocky mentality. Stay confident in yourself, but stay measured. Talk to your manager about career paths and really understand if there's a viable path for you to achieve that role where you are. And even at the same time, I would say network. Get out, make sure you're involved with HR associations, make sure you're going to network events, opportunities, volunteer, get on a board. These are things, they sound scary for someone that hasn't done them. But once you start doing them, it's what I mentioned earlier with networking. It just broadens you so much to a new group of people while not losing or forgetting the original group of people. So, this leads to everyone's probably heard of someone in their life that said, "Oh, geez, I've never applied for a job. I just get the offers," or, I find my job by knowing someone. That's networking. You'll hear about opportunities. You'll hear about, hey, you know what? We're thinking about doing something, and then they'll pick your brain, and one thing can lead to another. So understand the path and the opportunity where you are. Get out there and network, and make sure you're staying grounded and confident along the way.
That's great advice. Well, Josh, this has been a lot of fun. Thanks so much for coming on the Why People podcast. I learning all about it, but thanks so much for your time today.
You too, Sean. Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.